This is the August 26th, 2015 Planning Board meeting for the Brittons, who own a 4.5-acre parcel above me and across from me, but will drain to me by going under Route 1 and down along Route 1 and back under Route 1 and into Seaview Terrace. It's absolutely insane when you look at everything that I've proven. The sad part is that the residents take beatings in these meetings when they want to develop properties, because residents all come out screaming about water that's going to come to them because the city does not provide infrastructure on this side of town. So they approve development after development as long as the applicant can show how the water is going to drain away from their property to get it off the property, knowing full well that it's going to go to somebody else's private property. And in my case, all of this area, as it goes to each private property, eventually all comes to me, channels into me. So I get the full slaughter and a flood zone A. And anyway, it's really involved, but I don't want to get into all that right now. Let's just play this meeting. This poor engineer I think he's doing it as a friend for the Brittons, and he was totally clueless as to what was going to be coming at him with problems with drainage. He's quite alarmed. And before when I came into the meeting, Dr. Megan Britton was in the hallway. So I introduced myself to her and welcomed her to Belfast and told her everything that I was going to say had absolutely nothing to do with her. So the city is big on pitting neighbors and individuals against each other. They're just horrible people. They act like the real estate agents act like they're selling paradise, and then everybody keeps quiet about it after they realize they've been sold absolute hell. And they keep promoting it as paradise so that they can keep their real estate moving. And they never go to City Hall to demand City Hall provide proper infrastructure so they could sell the houses ethically instead of lying and cheating people.
Regulates impact of freshwater wetlands, but also provides an exemption for any impact up to 4,300 square feet, which is basically a tenth of an acre. It's a close approximation to a tenth of an acre. When we get to discussing that, I'd be happy to talk to you about some of the particulars of what DEP's permitting thresholds are, and then we'd like to discuss permitting impacts through the state and through the town. Also regulating the freshwater wetlands in Maine is the Army Corps of Engineers through the Clean Water Act. They have a little less of a role where it's not a navigable water, but they do have jurisdiction over the freshwater wetlands. So
yeah,
any work over 4,300 square feet in the project. That's
really interesting as he said that, because somehow when all this corruption started to send the water down to Seaview Terrace, somehow the DEP got into my property and claims that there's this tiny section that's DEP wetlands. So it gives them regulation over the water that they slaughter me with. And then they turn around and say they can't tell me what water's coming to me. But they'd be happy to issue me a permit by rule, and that's just the application. I was playing along with that 5 years ago, like, okay, following what they tell me to do. Turns out that that's like another corrupt plan of DEP and contractors. Once they hear permit by rule, the price jacks up. To stabilize my banks of 100 feet that got wiped out, beginning estimates were at $80,000. That was 5 years ago. So Wayne will mention here about this permit by rule as if this $75 application will restore all the property that he swept away from me and take me out of danger. Such a...
would need to be permitted through both of those agencies.
Tom, the entire subdivision? Or the entire subdivision? Or each lot?
The entire subdivision. So typically the way that's worked, DEP's take on it often is that a project of this size, which doesn't qualify for site location of development permitting, which is kind of DEP's really, it's for big projects, you know. Since it's a smaller project, they usually look at the impacts proposed by the developer. So if we were doing a project, you know, I'd say kind of more of a typical type subdivision project is where you just strike a road down the middle and you go lot, and then the developer is building a road and infrastructure up through there, and the state is usually looking at that piece of the impact, road and infrastructure up through there, and the state is usually looking at that piece of the impact, and then the lot owners are taking care of the anything on their individual lots. But the project as a whole is seen as one thing. They call it common scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So it is cumulative. So with this construction taking around 2,000 to 2,500 to 2,400 square feet of impact, that leaves another roughly 2,000 on the remainder of the project in here, before you get to a permitting threshold. Then any after that has to be reviewed and permitted by the state. That's typically how that's done. Stormwater, Sadie mentioned in her memo that the applicant hasn't done formal stormwater management plans, and that's correct. Two reasons for that. One is that the vast majority of the proposed development here drains to an existing stable drainage swale in Congress Street. And the second reason is that the applicant's not planning to develop any of the lots themselves beyond their own home. So that's the game plan there. One other item that came up was sidewalks, and something I'm happy to talk about. I did look into current sidewalk locations in the neighborhood. The closest one to the north is 1,700 feet at Grove Street, and there are none between the property and Route 1, the bypass to the south. That's kind of a summary of the project, and I know that there hasn't been a subdivision review in Belfast in a number of years, and I myself, it's been several years. It's been a little change in the engineering world, so haven't done a lot of this, so I'm kind of looking forward to working through this with you folks and working the process again. And I invite any questions that you might have.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to have a public hearing, but are there any clarifying questions from the board at this point?
Not right now.
Okay.
I have one small bit. Did you tell us the total of the wetlands? Did you identify that number?
How big they are?
Yeah.
I didn't tell you how big they are. I could do that by just doing some subtraction. It's going to be the difference. Okay, well, we could do it at the same time and check each other. It's going to be the difference between.
Oh, come on, what happened? Shoot. I'll have to pick it up from here. Okay, well, he's done talking, the engineer. The next video will be where I get up to speak about the drainage. I mentioned a development of 80 homes. The reason why I'm bringing that up because just because the development hasn't happened yet, it could happen at any time. And Belfast, in this area of town, has not prepared for any infrastructure. So they will let the development go up, and that will also drain to me. It just doesn't stop. So, later on, Wayne Marshall talks about, that the development fell through in 2002, but that's not the point. The point is that Belfast planning does not put in infrastructure for this side of town.